Hello, another bloody hypocrite here, and today I'm going to talk about how to read and learn about philosophy. In particular, I'm going to talk about why people who are looking to read and learn about philosophy shouldn't blindly attempt to read the original texts. Now, I'm going to issue a disclaimer here before anyone dislikes the video and yells at me in the comment section for denigrating the classics. I am not here in any way to argue that students of philosophy should avoid reading the original works of, say, Kant or Nietzsche, and I will be leaving unmolested the idea that these texts are important cultural intellectual artifacts in their own right. What I will be arguing, however, is that these kinds of works are often oversold to people encountering philosophy for the first time, and that recommending people new to philosophy make reading these incredibly difficult to parse texts the backbone of their philosophical education often just hurts people's understanding of philosophy more than it helps. So let's begin with the most common sense counter-argument to this video's thesis.
Dear hypocrite, if I want to learn about Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, I watch Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. If I want to learn about Lord of the Rings, I will just read Lord of the Rings. Why should learning about philosophy be any different? If I want to learn about Kant, I should just read Kant.
And that is a valid point. If we want to learn about various philosophers, it's probably worth reading the books that they explicitly wrote so that people could learn about their ideas. Like, that makes sense. They wrote those texts for a reason. But hold on a second. While some of these texts are highly accessible, a lot of philosophy requires a good bit of background knowledge and hand-holding to get the nuances right. Consider how philosophers and their texts are taught at university. A formal education in philosophy doesn't just consist of a reading list and an exam. Rather, it's a reading list along with a coordinated series of lectures and smaller tutorials where context can be given and misunderstandings can be caught and corrected. This is an important point to consider, and I'm going to use a hypothetical example to show why it's important. Consider, for instance, a random person learning philosophy. Let's call him, say, John. John picks up a copy of René Descartes' Meditations, arguably the text when it comes to teaching or learning about rationalism. Reading the text alone, the first sections go fine for him, and he is vaguely familiar with the cogito when it comes up, but like many students, he starts to get a bit turned around in the later parts of the book where the language gets trickier, and ends up finishing the text with the only clear and lasting impressions being Descartes' Skepticism. Consequently, he goes away thinking that the thrust of Descartes is that you don't know whether you're right now dreaming, and that basically we're all in the Matrix, and there's no way to know what's real because knowledge is too ephemeral, and what if a demon was tricking you right now, and wow, and deep. In a university setting, on a freshman level course on epistemology, this isn't really a problem. If John is attending lectures, this misunderstanding will be cleared up for him fairly early on, and if he isn't, then maybe in a tutorial he'll embarrass himself in a little class debate and realise that he needs to read the text more carefully. Outside of formal education, John misunderstands Descartes and just remains wrong about Descartes. Worse, he is most likely confidently wrong about Descartes, reasoning that he doesn't need any second-hand information since he read the original text. And until John is willing to turn to alternative sources for commentary on Descartes, his ignorance will just stay with him. We can't always approach reading philosophy like we do watching Taxi Driver or reading Lord of the Rings, because for some works of philosophy there is a significant amount of work to be done before or alongside reading it in order to guarantee a truly valuable experience. And without that work being done, or someone to help us do it like a knowledgeable instructor, we are likely to get more confusion than education for our efforts. And I need to make this absolutely clear, this is not a straw man. There are absolutely people out here who believe that a formal philosophy education is a scam because they believe that you can just read the famous works of philosophy and get the exact same education. People who emphasize reading the original texts, particularly to those looking to learn philosophy outside of the academy, often underestimate the sheer amount of prerequisite learning that is needed to meaningfully access these materials. For example, Nietzsche. Nietzsche is probably one of the most butchered authors in the Western canon, just on account of his work being almost impossible to understand for neophytes. Nietzsche's texts are peppered with references and commentaries on his contemporaries that render large chunks of what he wrote meaningless to those who are not versed in the same subjects he was. Yet every year, people go out and buy copies of Beyond Good and Evil and style themselves as Nietzschean philosophers despite having understood approximately 0.5% of the book they source as their inspiration. You need to do more than just read the text. That is, in a nutshell, what I think about reading influential texts in philosophy, particularly if they are long, difficult, or very old. Reading them is important in some specific ways for some people, but it shouldn't be seen as the sine qua non of an education in philosophy. Not everyone needs to read Wittgenstein's Tractatus. Not everyone can or should be expected to read the original Critique of Pure Reason. And there is no shame in browsing the Stanford Encyclopedia, getting yourself some introductory texts, learning from a friend, or even just going on YouTube to get some more digestible perspectives on what you are reading. Me from 10 years ago will probably want to kill me for saying this, but pop philosophy is often fine. And actually maybe better than the original texts if what you want is a general familiarity with the ideas and you don't have the resources at your disposal to read the more difficult authors with the depth and intensity required to do them justice. Again, I'm not saying don't read these books, or that all of these books are equally difficult. They're not. I'm just saying pick the texts that are right for you. I've seen too many people waste their time trying to learn philosophy outside of formal education by reading texts that they can only ever partially understand, instead of intelligently using other more accessible materials to help them work up to reading those original texts if they feel that would be useful to them. All I'm trying to do is recommend that you take the path that is right for you, and stick a big middle finger up at the pretentious snobbery and gatekeeping that insists you read Hegel in the original German if you want to truly understand philosophy. That's all from me. Happy reading, folks.